Hello, welcome back to Sterling Armory. We have a new series that we're starting here. I'm actually filming this a lot earlier than I expected, but we have a piece that is a great example that we wanted to use today for the topic of today. And so that's why we're starting early. So I'm a little unprepared for this one, but the new series is covering the Oakeshott Typology and what all those types mean, and the confusing points between them, etc., etc., etc. So so the reason why we're talking about this is so a lot of companies, including us here, we use the topology names to describe various different sword shapes and sword versions that we sell. So you might see names of swords saying type 18 or type 15 or type 12 or type 13, and it's a Roman numeral type if you're new to this. And you might wonder, what on earth is that? So basically what we wanted to do is cover this, and I went and I looked online, and I thought there was a lot of YouTube videos kind of describing the topologies, but I didn't find too much. So I figured we could add to the sword world, hopefully, and hopefully these discussions on each of the types in the topology will help. So real quick, what the topology is Ewart Oakeshott studied with another person named Peterson as he was growing up. I think this is in the late 60s, early 70s, or maybe the mid 70s. I don't quite remember, but he talks about it. And then the Peterson topology, it was describing older migration era and Viking era blades based on how the hilts looked. And it ended at Roman numeral IX. And that's where it ended. So he's like, well, I want to continue that and go from the 10th century all the way up to 16th, early 17th century. And so what he did is he used the Roman numerals, although Peterson's was not necessarily the numeric number, it was the alphabet stuff, I believe. I could be wrong on that. I'm not an expert in the Peterson topology. But the Peterson topology mainly talks about the handles, because all the blades are very similar at the time. So his other purpose in doing the topology was the common mindset in the 70s was that medieval swords were very crude, heavy, non-artistic chunks of swords. And that was a very common thought process, not only in normal society, but also in media and even in people who were supposed to study this stuff. They thought medieval blades were not as refined as blades of other eras and other eras and other locations around the world, such as Japanese blades, etc. And he wanted to, as he studied more, he realized that's actually not the case. Medieval swords are very intricate, they're very well made. And he was kind of describing the process of the evolutions of those blades, of what happened in the medieval time periods and what drove sword design is really the purpose of the topology. So, and again, in each of our topology videos here, I'm not going to go this much in depth, but it's the first one, and I'm doing it a little early, so we'll go through it. But the two books that we mainly cover, we published a bunch, but these are the two on the topology that are the best. The first one is The Sword in the Age of Chivalry, and this was initially released in, I believe, in 64. Is that right? Hold on. I should know that off the top of my head. So yeah, originally published in 64. Then they reissued it in 94, and he did a lot of additions to the topology in that reissue. So we'll talk about that we won't talk about it today because there wasn't any real changes to the Type 15s, but in other types, like the Type 18, there's a lot of changes that come up here. And then the other book, which was published, I believe, in 91. Is that right? Yes. So the other book published in 91 is Records of the Medieval Sword. So I have people ask me all the time, oh, which of those should I get? You should get both. So they're pretty different books. The Sword in the Age of Chivalry is more of Oakeshott describing the different types in the topology and describing the evolution of the sword through the ages. That's more the Sword in the Age of Chivalry. And then the Records of the Medieval Sword is more just a collection of examples of blades in each type. So if you want to see actual original pieces, this is probably the better book to get. But again, I recommend both because this goes into a bit more description on his original thought process in why he's doing the types he's doing. So, some other resources that are great. So the website My Armory. So an Armory spelt with the European version. So ARMORU. Wait, ARMOURY. There we go. I can spell. So that website has both of these books very summarized very well in their what's it called? I think it's featured content. It's been a while since I've been there, but in their featured content section, that website and please go there and support them. They're all funded by themselves. So, they don't make money off of there unless people donate. So basically it's a big forum online. It's a great place and a great resource that shows and organizes this better than I can talk about it. So definitely recommend going there, and I'll have the link below for that as well. So I hope that covers the topology. And so why is it used now? Like, why do we use it today? And the big reason is it's very convenient. There's such a large variety in swords in the medieval time period that this is a convenient tool to help categorize and group types of swords and based on their design and what they look like. So if somebody wants a blade that's designed for one task, they know to go with this type that's designed for that task. And then if somebody wants another blade for a different task, then the topology helps kind of guide that. So yeah, it's really just convenient. Is the topology 100% accurate and covering all blades? No, absolutely not. And there's overlaps between types. It's not a direct exact science at all. And he has no problem talking about that. So it's more of a guideline, if we can use that line. It's more of a guideline than it is a rule. So knowing that, we're going to dive into, actually, before I get there, there's two main groups of swords in his topology that he actually covers this in the Swords of the Age of Chivalry. He doesn't really cover it in records at all. But in the two groups, there's a defining moment in medieval history, and that's when plate armor starts becoming prevalent, like much more prevalent than prior. And that's somewhere between 1275 and 1350. So in between those years, plate armor just rises to the top in terms of defense. So that caused a drastic change in sword design. And so the two different groups in his topology are everything before that and then everything after. So groups 10 to 14 types 10 to type 14 are group 1. And then type 15 to type 22, I think is the last one, are group 2. And we're actually starting with type 15 today. So today's topic is type 15. I'm sure you saw it in the topic already. But you might be wondering, why don't you start at 10? Why are you starting all the way at type 15? So the reason why we're starting at type 15 is because that is what my preference is. So most of the blades that I make fall into the group of group 2, whether they're type 15s, 18s, 16s. They all fall in group 2. I do make types 12, or I don't do many 10s at all, but I do some 12s and some 13s occasionally. But for the most part, I prefer the later time period swords. That's just my preference. So that's the only reason why we're starting here. The other reason we're starting at type 15 is that there is also the most confusion between those types. So the later on you get in topology, the harder it starts getting, or the lines start getting more muddy between the types, especially type 15, which we're doing today, and type 18. That's probably the biggest question I get is, one, what the heck are these Roman numerals? What do they mean? Hopefully we answered that for the most part. And then two, what's the difference between a 15 and an 18? Because a lot of people, a lot of 15s and 18s have been classified incorrectly, and I've even done so. So it kind of really makes the lines blurry on what is a 15 and what is an 18. So I'm hoping we can kind of clarify that today. So real quick. So I'm going to go straight to on type 15s. using Oakeshott, excuse me, excuse me. Hopefully I can edit that one out, but probably not. So we're going to go use Oakeshott's words to kind of go through it. So the first thing he wrote about type 15s, and in each of the types, he goes through these strong characteristics. And so from Chivalry, he says type 15 is strongly tapering, acutely pointed blade with 4 sides of flattened diamond section. The edges are straight, and they taper without noticeable curves to a point, which might be strongly reinforced. So what does that mean? So now he's classifying the blade, by the way, by the blade shape. So if we talked about earlier, the Peterson topology classified mainly the hilt shapes. Well, Oakeshott realized, well, hilt shapes are all over the place in medieval times, but the blades are now you can start categorizing blades, and you can categorize the evolution of the blade based on the shape of the blade. Sadly, the 2D shape of the blade, which is what we're seeing mostly in images, is not the entire shape of the blade, right? It's just the 2D version. Blades are 3-dimensional, so we're going to go into that in a little bit as to how that's really the key to determining major differences when the lines are blurred. But so what he's saying, though, again, type 15 is a blade that's basically a long giant spike. They're straight edges going all the way to a very, very sharp point. So we have a great example, and this is why I'm filming this early. So this blade we finished up for a customer. Beautiful example of a type 15. So straight edges going all the way down to this tiny, tiny point. Now I haven't sharpened this one yet, so I can run my fingers on it and not get cut. But I do need to get this sharpened and shipped out quick, which is why I'm filming this now. So, but again, type 15. So we're ignoring the handle stuff for now. This is actually 15A, which we'll cover that in a second. But yeah, the edges, the blade is basically a very elongated triangle with no curves on the edges, going to a very, very acute point. So that is what defines a type 15 from a 2-dimensional standpoint. And if you only go off of that alone, that can cause confusion because some type 18s can almost be that as well. So if you go to the second book, though, which is in Records of the Medieval Sword, he actually does go a little bit more in describing what a type 15 is compared to what he talked about in Age of Chivalry. Although he does kind of go into it, just the Records book does it faster. So basically, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, but so paraphrasing a little bit. So the prior types of swords were designed primarily for slashing and hewing weapons, with maybe a secondary thought in thrusting. The Type 15, however, was meant to be able to deliver a lethal thrust, even though armor was largely of plate. So what this means is you needed a long, narrow spike that's almost designed to, dedicatedly designed, or primarily, if I can talk right, primarily designed for thrusting. So he also goes on to say it's developed along the plate armor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So from the 14th and 15th century there, or from 1300-ish to 1350-ish, when the plate armor comes about, the older types of blades that were primarily for cutting, they couldn't really do anything against plate armor. So Type 15 sword was developed with that long, narrow spike there to be able to get into the armor. So not only do we have a blade shape now, so we have two different ways to describe a Type 15. Its shape, but then also the context of the blade design. So the context of the blade design is this is a dedicated thruster. You can cut with it, but it's not the primary design of the blade. The primary design is thrusting. So it's not a great mixture of a cut and thrust sword. It's a great thruster and a poor cutter, if that makes sense. So that's a good way to describe a Type 15. And so for handles and stuff for Type 15s, I'm going to go into this. I'll probably go into this more in other types, but Type 15 is going to have all sorts of pommels and all sorts of guards, and he does go into that in the topology. In the Age of Chivalry, he goes into the handle. constructions of each. But the Type 15, if you see the Roman numeral XV Type 15, that's a single hand version. The 15A is the hand and a half version, which is what I have here. And most commonly they have wheel pommels, and then most commonly they have guards, not like this one, but they actually come out and then have spikes going down. So if you're familiar with the Black Prince sword, that's a very, very classic Type 15. For other types, I'll probably go further into handle designs, but I spent a lot of time early on in this video going through the topology in general, so I'm not going to cover handles too much. So again, important to note. So Type 15 is, see how those lines, if I can get it right, can you see? Mostly. So the sword itself, the edges are straight. They go to a very, very acute point, and it's a dedicated thruster. So because it's a dedicated thruster, something I didn't say earlier, it's also a pretty stiff blade. So the cross section is very thick for a stiff, dedicated thrusting blade. So there's a lot of confusion between Type 18s and Type 15s. So what's the difference? So Type 18, I also have a good example here of Type 18. So basically, the reason why there's confusion is because the cross sections of the blades are the same. So Type 18 has that same diamond, diamond shaped, flattened diamond, I should say, cross section. But instead of having lines that go to a point, straight lines that go to a point, the Type 18 has lines that curve into a point. So the big difference here, hopefully you can see it on the camera, is that those lines, yeah, you can see there, I think. See how they curve to a point? So they curve up into a point instead of just being straight lines to a point. However, here's where the confusion comes in, especially on historical blades, and Oakeshott talks about it himself. So if you get confused between the two, don't feel bad. I mean, he did himself, and there's still a lot of confusion today, and some companies even get it wrong on their advertising. And I've done it. So what happens on a Type 18, if you keep sharpening and resharpening and resharpening and resharpening your curved edge, well, the more you resharpen it, the flatter it gets. So eventually it's going to get to the point where it looks like a Type 15. However, this is where you can't just take the two-dimensional shape by itself. You have to take the shape and the context of the blade as well and how it's used. So Type 18s are not dedicated thrusting blades. They're good at thrusting, but they're also cutting blades as well. I hope those don't fall over while I'm talking. So the reason why the edges on a Type 18 curve to a point is because that gives you a wider blade and a shallower cutting cross section. So Type 18s are typically thinner, so they're a bit more flexible to allow for that good cutting capability where you want to cut with it. So when you get to a blade like the one, and this will probably be finished by the time this airs, but this is the blade we're doing in our How It's Made, is what do you classify this as? So this has straight lines running to a point, but that point just has a little bit of roundness in there. So what would you classify this? And if you've been watching our videos, you know I classified it wrong. So when I originally was looking at this, I just wasn't even thinking. I was just going off the 2D shape of the blade only. So I called it a Type 15 because if you only look at the two-dimensional shape of this, it looks like a Type 15. But the intent of this blade is where the difference comes in. So is this little curvature here enough to call it a Type 18? Most would say no. Most would say no, this is still a Type 15. Where the difference is, though, is flex, right? So this cross section is not a dedicated thruster at all. So this blade shape is not a dedicated thruster. It's thinned out a lot, so you can actually cut with it. So you can tell it's the context and the purpose of this blade was not just for thrusting, but it was a thrust and it was a cut and thrust blade designed to do both. So that's why it jumps to an 18 and not a 15. So I hope that makes sense. I hope I didn't muddy the waters on anything. So Type 15 blades. So if you see two blades online that have a very similar look, but one is called a Type 15 and one is called a Type 18. If they categorize them correctly, that can now hopefully help you tell you one thing. The Type 15 will be a stiffer, more thrust, purpose-built blade. The Type 18 will be more of a mix. That it won't be as stiff. It'll probably be a lighter blade, and it'll be a cut and thrust blade instead of a dedicated thrusting blade. So I hope that makes sense, and hope that clears up the difference between a 15 and an 18. And yeah, so that's it for our first video for topology. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and we're going to be doing each of the types eventually. Although again, we're not doing them in order. We're basically doing them. We're the ones that we make the most. We're doing in that order. So type 18s are the ones we actually make the most. That's probably our next video. But then we have 16s and 17s that we also make in the group 2, and then we'll go back, dive into group 1, talking about those as well. So any questions, let us know in the comments below. I hope that cleared up some questions. I probably muddied the waters, but hopefully that clears up what a Type 15 is, what the Oakeshott topology is, and I think I covered everything. So if you have any questions, again, please let us know and join in the conversation. Oh, also, one interesting thing I learned a while back when reading Oakeshott, and I think he's correct on this, but if you guys study the German stuff, let me know. So he noticed that Type 15s are very rare to find in Germany. Even though there's a lot of German longsword stuff, the Type 15 just didn't really make it over there. And, you know, I haven't done too much German sword work. I've done a little bit, but I can tell that, like, if you look at Fiori's work versus looking at Mayer's or any other German treaties, you can probably tell why a Type 15 probably wouldn't work so well in Germany, and maybe that's why they never gained favor there. So yeah, if you have any more knowledge on that than I do, you know, let me know below. And yeah, hopefully you'll enjoy this series. And I'm assuming by the time this airs, our How It's Made will be done, and then we're going to do, I think, one more series, and then this one will air. So thanks again, and find us on Facebook. The link's right there below. We're also on Instagram, Sterling Armory, and I'll make sure to link the My Armory link below as well. And we will catch you next time. And until then, happy sorting. I don't even know how to end my own stream.